919.
So it is time for your property segment this afternoon, and joining us in the studio this afternoon, a very good afternoon to you, and welcome back to our studios, Harry. Lucky to have you.
Awesome, thanks Al. Always great to be here and looking forward to it.
Lekker. So today we're going to be talking about, and I think this is a topic that a lot of people well, I suppose it happens to a lot of people when renting a house, and that is getting upset with one another, having that tiff,
Having a little fight.
And I know that this has happened with many people. I mean, you always hear about incidents like that where you don't get along with your landlord, or you don't get along with the tenant, maybe, and all of that, I suppose. And this afternoon, that is exactly what we're going to be chatting about, right?
Landlord and tenant disputes, exactly. Fairly commonplace, and I think everyone who has ever rented a property as a tenant, or if you're a landlord and you have a rental property, has got a horror story or two. So yeah, we're talking about landlord and tenant disputes. Can they be prevented? And maybe look at one or two sort of practical
examples.
Tips and
I want some examples, because I'm sure you've seen many of those.
We've seen a couple. Al.
Yeah. So what are we seeing in Joburg though? Because I would imagine you go to Cape Town. I mean, that's very lax. Up here in Joburg, we are on fire, Johnny. If you want to have a roll, we ready.
I don't think you must underestimate those sleepy Cape Townians, though, Al.
Yeah.
I mean, their property market is absolutely flying at the moment, so no doubt they're going to have a few stories of their own. And to be honest, I kind of get the sense, and this is purely my sense, that things in Joburg are fairly even. I can't say that I've noticed, certainly in our portfolio, a massive uptick in problems. I think there's been just a constant couple, and quite honest, if I look back at, as I said, our portfolio of the 1,500 odd properties that we manage, there's maybe 2 or 3 at a time that have got some serious issues.
Yeah. What are the biggest causes, though?
Always, from the tenant side, when the tenant doesn't pay his rent, that's the biggest one. And from the landlord side is when the landlord does not do the maintenance that he's meant to do. And then bigger than both of those together probably is at the end of the lease, when the landlord does not refund the deposit.
I was just about to say the deposit is always seems to be an issue, hey?
Out of the items, the times we get dragged into the rental housing tribunal, 9 out of 10 are about a deposit that hasn't been refunded, whether it sometimes is correctly so or not. The tenant has left the place in a mess. The landlord's entitled to use the deposit to fix it up. Tenant's unhappy about it. Off we are to the tribunal.
But sometimes the tenant could be in the right and the landlord could be in the wrong.
100%.
For argument's sake, if my geyser packs up, and I have let the landlord know numerous times, and I am day 5 of showering in cold water in this winter, and I decide, you know what, I'm going to go and get somebody to come and put in a geyser, and I'm going to take it off my rent, even though that is not allowed, is it?
The most lease agreements will prevent that from happening, but that said, and it's actually quite. Right before this, I met with a friend and we discussed his rental property and some serious concerns and problems that they've had.
Yeah.
And it's actually all about how you approach this. So even though the lease might prevent it, there's nothing from the landlord and the tenant reaching an agreement, especially if it's urgent, that the tenant will pay to go and have this geyser fixed. And the geyser is maybe not a great example because there's normally insurance and stuff involved in that. But the tenant, there's no reason why the tenant can't go and have something fixed or repaired that can be done immediately for him, and the cost may be less than sending out a contractor, and that he can then discuss that with the landlord and agree to a remission in the rent for the $1,000 or whatever it is for that month to get it done quickly and properly. It saves the landlord time by not having to send a contractor out to do it, and the tenant's problem is immediately sorted out. So there's no way, it's not to say it can't happen, let's put it that way.
Well, let me ask a question this way then. Where does the urgency come? Who is responsible for the urgency of sorting out a geyser, for argument's sake? And I would imagine this comes down to your human rights as, never mind a tenant, but your human rights as a South African.
So I think, let's take a step back, first of all.
Yeah.
And landlord and tenants disputes can in most cases, be prevented by having the foreknowledge up front as a tenant. What's in your lease? What are your rights? What and how do you approach that? And as a landlord, exactly the same thing. You need to understand that as a landlord, you do have certain obligations, and the obligations for the landlord, once the lease is up and running, is maintain the structure of the property. So we're talking walls, roof, electrical installations, plumbing installations. All of that is 100% the landlord's problems. The only time the tenant is responsible to fix any of those is if they have either deliberately or accidentally damaged any of those items.
Fair enough.
The tenant is responsible to keep the inside of the property clean and to do certain maintenance as well. Stuff like if you start getting a bit of mildew or mold in the shower, that's for the tenant to sort out. And a product called Mold Buster does that very quickly in a few seconds. A tenant is responsible to keep it clean, to keep things working. Door handles, doorknobs, lights, ovens, those kind of things are actually specified in the Rental Housing Act as the tenant's responsibility. But once you understand what your lease agreement says and what your responsibilities are, then that's the first step in how you approach it. And the second thing is, a couple of weeks ago we also had a discussion about you're in a long-term relationship here.
Yeah.
And the relationship goes two ways. And if you're going to be belligerent and want to fight about every single thing, that relationship isn't gonna end very well, I don't think. But if you're prepared to be reasonable, and it's not always about is it legal and are you right? Is it reasonable? Can you get something done? The lease agreement says that you can't deduct money from your rent to have something fixed, but if you agree with the landlord to do that, then that should be able to be done.
So what is the responsibility then from the tenant's point of view? What are the key things that a tenant needs to make sure that they do to eliminate any kind of problems or arguments with the landlord, for argument's sake?
Number one, as you said, is pay your rent on time and in full. There are very, very few occasions where there's a good reason why that can't happen. But I'm saying, obviously, assuming that you've got a job and you've got the money, pay your rent, pay it on time and pay it in full. And if you have a problem, immediately speak to the landlord and say, hey man, I've just been retrenched, or whatever the case may be, and see if you can come to any other arrangement or make an alternative plan. And if you aren't able to pay the rent, you need to make provision. The CPA allows you to give a month's notice, 20 business days notice, and then move out. So from the tenant's point of view, is pay your rent, pay it on time. And secondly, do your bit to maintain the items that I've mentioned previously that you're supposed to maintain, or if something else happens, that's the landlord's responsibility. You need to report it. If there's a roof leak, how does the landlord know to fix it unless you report it?
Fair enough.
Because that roof leak also then becomes a much bigger problem down the line if it's not attended to immediately. So those are the two biggest ones. From assuming you're paying your rent, take care of the items you're meant to take care of in terms of the lease and report the maintenance. That's the landlord's responsibility.
Now, another question that I have for you, and it's probably another one that a lot of people can relate to, is the landlord pitching up at your house on a Sunday afternoon at 3 o'clock. You in your pajamas because it's winter and it's cold, sitting in front of the fireplace, and he wants to all of a sudden do an inspection around the house.
Listen, you spoke about some real live case studies. We've had cases where a landlord has pitched up back to his house to take a swim in the pool.
No ways.
With the tenants and their family there on a Sunday afternoon having a braai.
Wow.
The landlord pitches up in his Speedo. Hey, how's it, guys? I'm coming for a quick dip.
Must have been a heat wave that dragged him all the way to the house while the tenant is still there.
Yeah.
All right. What is the tenant's rights when it comes to something like that?
So the tenant has a right to privacy.
Yeah.
The landlord has a right to inspect his property and to visit his property, but he has to give reasonable notice and there must be a decent reason for it. It could simply be, I'm coming to do an inspection, or it could be, you've reported that the geyser has a problem and I want to come and have a look at it and I want to bring my contractors to see. But for the landlord to arrive on the door, knock and say, "How's it? How are you doing? I've come for a cup of coffee or a swim," is not on. So the landlord is allowed to do it, but he has to give reasonable notice.
Okay, all right.
A tenant has a big right to privacy here, and he has a right to have a safe, and the property must be fit for the purpose that it was to be rented. Yeah.
All right. Now, when does the landlord have the right, or why would the landlord come and inspect their property maybe once a month, twice a month, or whatever the case may be? And how many times are they allowed to do that?
So there isn't a time specified that you can do it, and it's all about reasonableness. What is reasonable? Once a month, I'm not so sure that that's reasonable. Twice a month, definitely not, unless there's a problem, unless there's a known problem and there's a follow-up. Every couple of months may be more reasonable, and also depends on the time of the day that's going to happen. Obviously, the tenant needs to be home to let them in, so maybe early evening or late afternoon would be acceptable, but 9 o'clock at night, certainly not. And so we had another landlord who also decided to do some 3 a.m. in the morning inspections.
No way.
Wow.
Peeping through the windows and checking what's happening.
Wow.
We've had that before as well.
Wow.
But I suppose if you have a viewing, then it becomes a bit different. Like if one tenant is moving out and you've got a tenant coming in, obviously then you'll have the property, you'll be coming into the property
More
a lot
often. But yeah,
as a landlord.
That's quite a specific reason, Lesedi, and yes, the lease agreement will make provision that the landlord and the agent are allowed to do viewings in that last month or whatever the time frame in. But every single one of those viewings, while the tenant is still in occupation, it will be arranged. They will be notified, they're discussed.
They can't just
backwards,
pitch up,
forwards.
right?
Yeah, can't just pitch up with someone. So, if I'm going to do a viewing at 4 o'clock and 5 o'clock this afternoon and tomorrow at 3 or whatever. So it will be arranged with the tenant.
Mm. So another thing, taking photographs before you move into a house and after you move into a house, is that something that one should do, especially when it comes to proving that this carpet did have a stain on before I moved in, kind of vibe?
A lot more than just taking photographs. The Rental Housing Act specifies that a full inspection needs to be done in the presence of the landlord and the tenant before the tenant takes occupation, and again before they move out. So that a very good idea. It doesn't the Rental Housing Act doesn't say take photos, but I mean the best and the easiest way to show exactly what you found, because I can mark down on a piece of paper, carpet dirty or whatever. But if you have a photograph to show that, it is just so much better. So we use, and most property agents these days use, quite decent software where it's just off your phone, but it's a whole series of photographs and comments about the condition of the property. You need to make sure that if the landlord and tenant do not do a joint inspection when the tenant moves in at the start of the lease, the landlord cannot hold the tenant liable for any damages at the end of the lease.
Okay.
That inspection has to take place. It's a legal requirement.
Okay. And then another question I have, and this is totally off topic. How many properties have you been to after somebody's rented and there's an iron mark on the carpet? Because I think this is a common problem.
It happens so often.
Common problem. What
I
about
have
iron
moved
on the
into
floor?
homes where there is an iron mark on the carpet more than once.
I don't know how it happens, but the iron either falls off the ironing board or something. But
And
I
then
mean,
you leave it there.
or the iron is put on the floor and then it falls over when you go out to go, and I don't know. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just it's crazy.
All right, so I've got some myths or facts for you this afternoon. Some
Okay.
quick fire questions, if I can. And I'm going to start off with the landlord may enter whenever they like. Is that a myth or is it a fact?
I think that we've dealt with that definitely.
Yes, but
definitely a
I thought
myth.
I'd just throw it in there
Make
again.
sure.
Make 100% sure.
Definitely a myth. The landlord can enter provided they've given reasonable notice and arranged that with the tenant.
Yeah. And then there's the deposit. Does it belong to the landlord or does it belong to the tenant? And should the landlord just chuck it into his account and go on holiday once you've moved in, kind of vibe?
The deposit definitely belongs to the tenant, and only it can only be used by the landlord should the tenant end up owing any money to the landlord in terms of the lease, either in unpaid rent or in damages at the end of the lease, or if they were responsible to pay for something, let's say utilities, that they didn't do and it's in the landlord's name. So the deposit always belongs to the tenant, but can only be used by the landlord if the tenant owes the landlord money.
And then another myth.
I need to ask you a question
Yeah.
before we move on to that one. So let's say the tenant's supposed to give you a deposit at the end, and there's damages to the cupboard, and they say, okay, I'm gonna get a service provider to fix the cupboards, and this is how much they're gonna cost. And you as a tenant feel that you can find somebody to fix those same cupboards for a cheaper price. Is that something that you're allowed to do, or is that up to
That's a great
the landlord to
That's a
decide?
great question, Lesedi. So one of the main obligations that the tenant has is to hand the property back at the end of the lease in the same condition it was when they received it. So if they've damaged the cupboard now during the course of the lease, they've got all the time in the world once that cupboard becomes damaged to have it repaired or replaced or fixed. Once you've done that final inspection and it's noted on the final inspection that this cupboard is damaged, the entry inspection shows it wasn't damaged, the tenant has basically given an open checkbook to the landlord to say, okay, now you fix it.
Oh, so it has to be before the final
Before.
inspection.
If the tenant can fix anything before they move out, in fact, they have to. If they don't, because we've had cases like this before where now the tenant wants 3 different quotes and is chasing you backwards and forwards in all directions to spend weeks and weeks to get a cheaper price on fixing that cupboard. No. If you haven't done it, and it's your responsibility to have done it before you move out, you have to do it. Otherwise, the law simply says the landlord can fix that thing. It must be reasonable. Okay, again, the reasonableness, and that's a little bit of an interpretation. And the only obligation the landlord has is to show the tenant the invoice or the receipt that he actually did it. The landlord cannot deduct any amount from the deposit if he hasn't actually spent the money in terms of damages and repairs. Obviously, if it's unpaid rent, that's a different story. Yeah.
All right, well, give us a couple of quick fire tips to end off the segment.
So I think from a landlord's perspective, and I think I've said it every time we've spoken about this, is to screen your tenants properly. This is a long-term relationship. You don't want to end up in a relationship with somebody that you're not going to be able to get on with, or that is showing all the signs that they are unable to pay the rent down the line. So screen that tenant properly. You know, I've got to blow our own horn here. Make use of a good agent and make sure you have a proper lease agreement signed that covers you, that covers your property. Remember, in general, we're talking about if the landlord has a 1.5 million rand property, he's giving that property to the tenant and their family for the next 12 months, and he's getting maybe 10 or 12,000 rand back in rent. So the landlord's definitely the one who's got more skin in the game, as far as I'm concerned. So make sure that's covered by a proper lease. Do your inspection that we spoke about. If the landlord doesn't do the inspection, and the number of landlords that I come across who manage their own properties who do not do that entry inspection is scary. They don't do it because they don't know. They don't understand the law. They don't do this on a daily basis. And then from a tenant's perspective, know your lease agreement. Know what your rights are. Read through that lease, and especially when it comes to the obligations. As we said, the example that Sedi mentioned about, if at the end of the lease, once you've moved out, something must be fixed, you have no more right to say how or who must do it. Do it beforehand to understand your responsibilities and your obligations from that point of view. Report any maintenance issues immediately, especially when it's not your responsibility. If it's for the landlord to fix, report it so they can do it. And keep good documents, be reasonable, be fair, and sometimes it means maybe doing a little more, but show the landlord that you're in this relationship for the long run, and that you're not going to be fighting with him for any reason or on any cause, especially if there's something that you write about. You write about this, but you make such a big point about it that you break the relationship in the meantime.
And then just to wrap up, before we check out our property of the week, just give us a final closing statement just to wrap up our afternoon chat this afternoon.
I think, as we said, we can sit and mention every legal recourse, dissect the Rental Housing Act, the Consumer Protection Act, and go backwards and forwards. But this is a long-term relationship, and I think prevention in a case like this is much better than trying to solve it afterwards, than the cure. And the cure in this case is going to be in court or in the Rental Housing Tribunal. So be reasonable, and take the mindset, both the landlord and the tenant, of what do I need to do to have a good, healthy, strong, long-term relationship with this person.
Lovely.
That's a relationship for me.
Lovely. Well, let's find out what we have as far as our property of the week is. We got Kerry Schultz on the line. A very good afternoon to you, Kerry. Welcome to the drivetrain once again.
Hi there. Thank you so much for having me this afternoon.
Lovely. Tell us what your property of the week is today, or for this week, in fact.
Sure. I would love to tell you about this little apartment we have listed in Epsom Terrace, Bryanston. It's a great investment property. It's a 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom, middle floor apartment. Though the estate's a little bit older, this one has been updated a few years ago. So the kitchen, bathroom, and flooring are all more modern. The kitchen ticks quite a few boxes for tenants. Granite countertops, space for 2 appliances, 2 sinks, and a gas stove. Often hard to find on a 1-bedroom in this price range. Location is everything, of course. Many tenants reside at Epsom Terrace and work in the office blocks close by, including the campus. There is actually a tenant in place now. He's just signed his new lease agreement, and he's paying 8,200 Rand a month, as well as electricity and water. He's very happy, and he'd like to stay on long term.
So this is one of those investment properties at the end of the day, isn't it?
Yes, definitely. I mean, we would give the tenant ample notice if someone wanted to live there themselves, but it really does make sense for investment.
Indeed. Now, if people want to get a hold of you, Kerry, and they're interested in this property, but you know what, before we even do that, we haven't even got a price tag on this property yet.
Yeah, sure. This one is listed at 750,000 Rand.
That is not bad. I mean, this is a property
No.
under a bar. You're getting 8,500 Rand return on your investment every single month. It sounds like a no-brainer, really. If they want to get hold of you,
Yeah.
Kerry, how do they?
Sure. They are welcome to give me a call. My cell phone number is 078 046 0200, or they can also have a look at the listing on our website, etchellsyoung.co.za, and they can send an inquiry that way as well.
Fantastic. And if people want to check out the property, is it listed on your website? Can they go and have a look at the property itself?
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Fantastic. Kerry, thanks for sharing your property of the week with us. We'll chat again soon.
Thank you so much.
Only a pleasure.
Thank you.
Cheers now. Bye-bye.
Okay.
And that concludes our afternoon this afternoon.
It does. Thank you. I really think that this might need a second part to this discussion, because we've only just started scratching the surface
Yes.
with landlord and tenant dispute. So maybe we'll schedule a follow-up at some point.
Lovely. Sounds fantastic. Anyway, that was Etchells Young on your radio this afternoon in the form of Harry. He is definitely not a stranger to the show, and we'll chat with you again next week.
Great. Thanks, Al. Thanks,
Cheers now.
Sedi.